At one of the first playtesting sessions for Station Decimus, one player returned to their ship very early and then sat there watching the rest of the game unfold without any involvement. My first instinct after the game finished was to ask them how they felt the downtime was, expecting them to say that they'd been really bored. Instead, they said they actually loved watching the other players continue and seeing the game unfold in front of them on the table. It completely changed the way I saw player elimination and made me think a lot more about what circumstances can make player elimination not feel bad for those who have been eliminated. So, by player elimination, I mean anything which takes one player out of the game, whether that's voluntary or because another player has done something to them. They can no longer win or participate in this particular round. We've all been there when you were younger and someone used to drag out Monopoly at a family occasion, and one player, half an hour in, gets eliminated. They then get the joy of spending the next 3 hours watching what was a dull enough game if you were still playing, let alone if you're sat on the sides. And that is why I think player elimination has a bad rep. Certain games, like Monopoly, which do it in a way where you can be eliminated very early and with no more involvement in the game, and the game itself isn't particularly enjoyable as a spectator. So, what can make it worse and what can make it better? Starting with the things that make player elimination worse. Games with particularly long runtimes can leave you with a long time of nothing to do. Games which have early elimination can leave you with an even longer time. Even if the game isn't that long, if you're eliminated in the first minute of a 15-minute game, you're probably going to get bored. Games where the continuing play isn't that enjoyable as a spectator. Some games have real table presence and can really tell a story, making it enjoyable even if you're not still playing. The final one, and one which isn't necessarily bad, but can be, is not having anything to do. Some games will try and give you things to do when you die, whereas others will expect you to just sit back and watch. Things which can make elimination slightly better then. These are largely the inverse of those worst things, such as having a shorter game leading to less player downtime, having temporary deaths rather than permanent ones, so you might be out for the round or the mission, but you'll be back again shortly. Games with table presence or storytelling, which mean it's still enjoyable to watch the other players. Having agency over when you choose to leave rather than being eliminated. And finally, games which naturally cluster the elimination towards the end of the game. So, for example, games like Skull, where you might have lots of players lose lives early, but the chances are players won't actually start getting eliminated until a decent chunk of the game has been played. So, those are some of the ways it can be made better or worse. And I'd like to take a look at some specific examples of games which do interesting things to try and solve problems with player elimination. Starting with, as I mentioned, short rounds. So games like Bang are very, very short, and therefore, if you are eliminated, it doesn't feel so bad. You can just wait for the next round to start. The game is really designed to be replayed. You don't tend to get short games like that out and just play them once. So being eliminated doesn't feel as bad if you know that in a few minutes the game is going to be reset and you'll be right back in the action. Another approach is games like Gloomhaven, which have a temporary elimination. Rather than being fully eliminated from the game, you can just be exhausted. That means you'll sit out the rest of the scenario and you won't take any part. But as soon as the next scenario is set up, you get to jump right back in. So it's really framed as losing the fight rather than losing the game. A lot of modern co-ops follow this approach, so it's becoming increasingly popular. Another approach, which is slightly less common though, is giving dead players something to do. In games like Dungeon Mayhem, you'll often find you can do a single basic action after you've been eliminated. In Dungeon Mayhem, this means once you're eliminated, you can do a very basic attack to knock 1 health off of a player. This means it's not quite as boring to be out. It does, however, have its drawbacks, and with the Dungeon Mayhem example, you'll often find it can lead to king-making or vendettas where the person who has just been eliminated will just tick health off the single player who eliminated them. Whether or not that was the designer's intention, some people like it, some people don't. A really interesting approach is to remove the elimination entirely. In games like Cockroach Poker, for example, the first person to get eliminated is the loser. There is no one winner. All the other players who were not eliminated win together. The game could easily have continued until there was only one player left standing, but instead they decided to flip it round, having a single loser and therefore no player elimination. And finally, my own game, Station Decimus. In Station Decimus, each mission you're exploring, and at some point you can choose to return to the safety of your own ship, banking the points you've got, but taking no more part in the mission, essentially eliminating any future involvement in that mission. The key difference here is that the elimination is a choice made by the player. They've chose to return to their ship, and they could have chosen to explore further if they had a different risk appetite. They haven't been forced out the game, it was entirely voluntary. Because it's a push your luck game as well, players often really enjoy watching the other players at the table push their luck that bit further. This feeds back into the earlier pro for elimination, where it can be better if the game is enjoyable to watch. In this case, the feedback I've had is that sitting back and watching other people risk dying horribly aboard a space station is genuinely entertaining for the other players. Another way that the elimination in Station Decimus works is that the players have a risk appetite which will generally be roughly similar. Most players will push their luck, some will push a bit further, but in general you'll find most players will return within a few rounds of each other. This means that although you may be the first person to return, the chances are, if you thought there was a risk that you were going to die in the next round, the other players who've now progressed even further along the risk are even more likely to return. So the honest conclusion here is that not all of these things will work for all games. Not every game can be made to have short rounds. Some games need to have a winner and can't work on a single loser basis. Things like temporary death only really work in campaign games or games with multiple missions or rounds to them. And voluntary elimination only really works where the decision is meaningful and the game can be entertaining to watch. But I think it's really important to reframe the common question of how can I remove player elimination to how can I make sure the player elimination doesn't feel bad at the table? Whether it's by trying to reduce the amount of player elimination or by giving them something meaningful to do or watch, player elimination can still be a fun part of a game. As I mentioned, Station Decimus is built around voluntary elimination. You get to choose when you return to your ship and sit out the rest of the mission. If you want to try it for yourself and see how this type of player elimination feels on the table, sign up to my email list. There'll be a link in the description below.